All right, everyone. We are solving quadratics. I cannot express more that the verb of today is solve. Solving quadratics. It is exactly the same as factoring from last week, except for one teeny tiny difference at the end. So when we are factoring, we rewrote the equation in another form. It was still an equation. We went from standard form to intercept form, the form with the parentheses. Okay? When you are asked to solve a quadratic, you are actually trying to find what x is equal to. So your answer is in the form of x equals a number. Now, quadratics have two solutions. Okay, most of the equations you've done up to this point, you've only had one answer, x equals 6, x equals 2, and that was your answer. How many times does my blue quadratic cross the x-axis? Here's x. How many times is it crossing? Twice. One in each star. We are finding those solutions. They have a lot of different names. They can be called x-intercepts. They can be called zeros. Some people call them roots. Some people just call them solutions. We are using factoring to find these two solutions. Okay? So when I'm asking for you to factor a quadratic, you write out the equation with your two sets of parentheses. When I'm asking you to solve, your answer is in the form x equals a number and x equals a second number because there are two solutions. All of our quadratics will have two solutions this week. Okay? But we solve it the same way. We still do our greatest common factor. We still identify our A, B, and C values. We still do our X method of factoring. All of that is the same. The only difference is how we write our answer. Not an equation. We want solutions. So let's look at our first problem. Example 1. Again, I cannot express. We are asked to solve the quadratic equation 5x squared minus 10x minus 120 equals 0. We are trying to figure out what x equals. If I were to put this problem in front of you on a piece of paper and tell you to solve it like the old ways, you would probably draw your little waterfall down the equal sign, and that's all you could do. Because how many variables are there? There's actually two. X squared is one, x is the second. Those are different variables. You cannot solve this equation like you did in Algebra 1. You have to factor to solve it. Okay, so let's start factoring. The first thing I'm going to do always is common factors. Find the greatest common factor. Now, we can take a little shortcut. What is my smallest value? 5. What are the factors of 5? 1 and 5. Since 5 only has the factors 1 and 5, that means my only possible greatest common factor is 1 or 5. And 1 doesn't even really count. So 5 is the only one we have to check. So we can go and check. Can you divide 10 by 5? Yes, you can divide it into 2 and 5. 120. Can you divide it into 5? Yes, it's actually 5 times 24. With that said, what's our greatest common factor? It's 5. 5 is the largest number we can divide each of our values by. Okay? Now, could you have listed all of your factors for all three numbers? Yeah, you would have still gotten 5, but, work smart. After we find our greatest common factor, last week, what did we do with that? We put it out front and did what? What do we do to each value? Take it out, divide by 5. We need to divide out a 5 from everything. We're taking out the greatest common factor. We're dividing it out. That's why we found it. 5 divided by 5 is 1. Bring down your x squared. 10 divided by 5 is 2, so bring down the minus and the 2x. And 120 divided by 5 is 24. Bring down your minus. So here's our same quadratic, except instead of having the 5 in all of those numbers, we divided it out. Makes our values smaller and more manageable, and it also allows us to write our factored form with the 5. Okay, what should I do now?
Distribute? No.
Not if we distribute, we'd actually go back to where we were. We are going to do our x method, but what do I need? I need to know what 3 things.
X, A times X. No.
A is?
5. No, A is 1.
Yep. B is?
2. C is 24.
C is negative 24. A, B, C. Yes, we are going to do the x method. Yes, we will multiply our A times C and put our B on the bottom, but we need to know what A, B, and C are first. That is our A, B, and C. Remember, the greatest common factor, that just floats out front until the end. Here's our A, B, C. So we go ahead and draw our x, and we go ahead and get to finding this quadratic's factors. If we know the factors, then we'll be able to find the solution. Okay? Up on top, we have our A value times our C value. So what is 1 times negative 24? It's the same, negative 24. Put it on top. On the bottom is that B value. B for bottom. What? Negative 2 on the bottom. And now the hardest part of factoring is finding our 2 numbers. Okay, we'll get to the point where hopefully you can start just cranking this out in your head. You'll see so many of them, you'll just start to know them like that. But just to help us reduce the number of things we have to try, we write our top number off to the side, and we write down all of its factors. It's got to be one of them. 24. 1 and 24. 2 and 12. 3 and 8. 4 and 6. Now these multiply to a positive 24 because they are both positive. We want it to multiply to negative 24, so we need to make a decision. Do I make my smaller numbers or larger numbers negative? If we make both negative, what's a negative times a negative? Then it's not negative 24. So only one side is negative. The bigger number, since the bottom is negative, that means the bigger numbers have to overpower the positive numbers. Okay? Now, let's say you accidentally made the other side negative. You can still find your answer. You'll just realize that instead of a negative 2, you'd get a positive 2, and you just flip the sign. So even if you make a mistake here, it's still salvageable. If you look at this list of 4 factors, which one makes sense to add up to negative 2, probably? 4 and negative 6. 4 plus negative 6 is negative 2. Those are the winner chicken dinner. Now, if you did accidentally make 4 positive or negative and 6 positive, it would add up to positive 2, and you'd be like, oh, that's the number. I just moved the sign to the other side, and then it'll be negative 2. So write these on the left and right. 4 and negative 6. We double check. You can always type those into your calculator, multiply them, get the top, add them, get the bottom. Okay, after that, we still have to do what on both sides? Divide by 1, because 1 is our A value. It's the best when A is 1, because what happens when you divide by 1?
They're the same.
Nothing. It stays the same. This is just still negative 6 and positive 4. P, Q. It is slow. Just once there's a lot of ink on the screen, it starts to bog down. All right. So usually, if I were asking you using the verb factor the quadratic, you would write out your factor. You'd be like, okay, I'll write my parentheses, I'll put in my x's, I'll put my GCF out front, and put my p and q in. +4, -6. Okay, if I asked you to factor, boom, there it is. You factored, done. But this problem didn't ask you to factor. It asked you to solve. Solve is the verb of choice. This is not a set of solutions. This is an equation. Our answer will always be x equals, x equals. There are two of them. The question is, what does x equal? Now, it's not equal to our p and q. X is not 4 and x is not -6, but it's close. When I'm asking you to solve a quadratic, I'm asking what numbers make this whole thing 0? Okay? If I plug in 4 for x, 4 plus 4 is 8. That's not 0. What would you have to plug in for x to make it 0? -4. What would you have to plug in for x in the second bracket to make it 0? +6. And look at, isn't that just the opposite? It's just the opposite. If p is 4, then one of my solutions is -4. If q is -6, then the opposite is +6. If I plug in -4, it makes everything 0, because it'll multiply everything by 0, and that's 0. If I plug in 6, 6 minus 6 is 0. If I multiply this equation by 0, it's gone. All you do is flip your sides, and those are your solutions. Okay? If I ask you to factor, you give me this. If I ask you to solve, you tell me what x equals. If I asked you to factor and solve, you would give me both. That's solving. Same, only difference is the very last step. We got one more to crank out. 8x squared minus 14x plus 3, and again, this is asking us to solve. You do not have to write its factored form. We only have to tell each other what x equals. Okay, start with your GCF. Remember, the trick here is what's our smallest number? What's our smallest number out of these? 3. And the only way to make 3 is 1 and 3. And you check, can I divide all of those numbers by 3? You can't. You cannot divide 8 by 3. You cannot divide 14 by 3. So this has no GCF, which is good. It's nice when there's no GCF because I get to skip the whole dividing step. And I go straight to what is ABC. A is, B is, and C is 3. Draw your X. Let's get going. Up on the tippity top. 24. A times C. 8 times 3. 24. B for bottom. -14 on the bottom. No. Let everyone find it. Again, you'll get to the point where, like Eli, you can start to see the patterns, start to know your factors really well, and you can just look and see. If you still struggle with it, that's fine. That's why we have the factor sheet. 24, we already did this one. 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, 4 and 6. These are my favorite ones. I like when the top is positive and the bottom is negative, because that tells me that both sides have to be negative. The only way I can get a positive number on top and add and get negative numbers if I make both negative. Both sides are negative. And again, that's because a negative times a negative is a positive. But when you add two negative numbers, it's still negative. Which of those is going to add up to 14? -2 and 12. -12. That adds up to -14. That's the only winner chicken dinner I can have. The others do not work. You can check them, I promise. They do not work. -2, -12. Does it matter if I flip the sides, do -12 and -2? Doesn't matter. The side doesn't matter. Just put one on the left, one on the right. I'm not done though. I divide both of these by a value, which is 8. Every problem, you divide by something different. You got to know what your a value is. Won't always be 1, won't always be 8. Just depends on the problem. It's time to think back hard to last week. How do we simplify these in our calculator? Because we must simplify our fractions. Math, enter, enter. So go ahead and type in -2 divided by 8. Math, enter, enter. Then do -12 divided by 8. Math, enter, enter. -3/2, yeah? There's my P, there's my Q. Now those are called factors. P and Q are your factors, but this asks us to solve. We want solutions. We need to know what x is equal to. In order for our quadratic to be 0, what do I do to -1/4? Oh. What do I do to -1/4? I just make it positive. Positive 1/4. Instead of -3/2, my solution is positive 3/2. All I do is flip the sign. If they're negative, make them positive. If they're positive, make them negative. And that's because if I add 1/4 and -1/4 together, it's 0. And when one of my factors is 0, then it multiplies the rest by 0, and it's nothing. It goes away. That's solving. The only difference was what? What do you do at the end? Flip P and Q, and that's what x equals. Otherwise, it is the same as factoring. Questions?